What if manufacturing in the United States isn't dead? We hear a lot from Donald Trump and other politicians, to be totally fair, about bringing back manufacturing to the U.S. as if we don't make anything anymore in this country. Donald Trump has said that over and over again. We don't make anything anymore. But the truth is, America is still a manufacturing giant. We make more stuff in this country than any other country other than China. And it should be noted that China is 4 times our population. So we just don't require as many jobs to manufacture those things anymore. We've gotten more efficient. I think that's a good thing. Some people don't. So why do we have this gap between the knowledge of manufacturing jobs going down without the knowledge of our exports actually going up? With the output of that manufacturing has gone up. I think that's a gross misconception. So here's the other question. Will Donald Trump's tariffs fix this problem, this so-called problem of not having enough manufacturing jobs? I don't think it will, and I'll show you why in this video. I'm Blake. I'm the homeless conservative. I'm a political junkie, so that you don't necessarily have to be. And I try to do these little explainer videos to help you understand the boring stuff that, frankly, who wants to talk about tariff stuff, right? But I love it, so let's talk about it. Okay, manufacturing output. It's at record highs. So let's talk about that. First, this from the Cato Institute. Simply put, the United States remains a manufacturing powerhouse. In 2020, it was the world's 4th largest steel producer, and in 2021 was the 2nd largest automaker and the largest aerospace exporter, accounting for nearly 16% of global manufacturing output in 2021, second only to China, which has 4 times the population of the United States. That's where I got this stat from. The U.S. had a greater share than Japan, Germany, and South Korea combined. By itself, the U.S. manufacturing sector would constitute the world's 8th largest economy. Now, that would surprise most of you because you probably don't know that we're exporting or even manufacturing a lot of stuff. If you look at this Pew Research from 2017, I know it's a little out of date, but you will see that the employment in manufacturing since 1987, so this is the 30 years between 87 and 2017, went down from 17.5 million to 12.5 million. So we did a decrease in jobs. However, in that same period of time, 1987 to 2017, our real output, adjusted for inflation and all sorts of other things, was increased by 60%. So they put the zero line as 2009, and basically it's increased from 60% since 1987. So our output increased by a much larger margin than the jobs decreased. We increased by 60%. That's roughly 30% of the jobs that we lost in the same period of time. So it even proportionally, we are outputting a lot of stuff. Now, some of that, we don't think that that's true. So if we scroll down a little bit on this Pew Research, if you ask Americans, most Americans know manufacturing jobs have declined, but only about a third know output has increased. So when Pew polled people in 2017, 81% of people were aware that the number of manufacturing jobs had decreased over the last 30 years. But what was the percentage saying the value of goods and products manufactured in the U.S. has increased over the last 30 years? Only 35% of people thought that it had increased. So we're right when we know that manufacturing jobs, and I think that's basically based on this. Politicians who need votes of working class people, they prey on our nostalgia. It's one of the tricks. You can prey on fear, you can prey on outrage, you can also prey on nostalgia. We always think, the entire thing of Trump is make America great again. When you ask people, when was America great? And I don't love this coming from the left because they're trying to pretend that America's never been great. And I don't like that sentiment that comes from progressives a lot of times. But they're asking for a specific year, but I think that's the wrong way to try to think about it. The point is, people do often have nostalgia for a previous period of time, even if they're wrong about the rose-colored glasses they have on and looking back at that. I can't remember who said it, but someone said, nostalgia is the rust of memory. And that's kind of true, right? We only remember the good stuff. We don't remember the bad stuff necessarily. That's why I think we got Donald Trump for a second term, is because people were like, hey, I remember not being as economically worse off in 2019, and he was the president, so let's give him another shot. And I think that's most of what the election came down to. So it's not surprising that politicians use nostalgia on us in a negative way. They're going to tell us those manufacturing jobs have decreased. They're never going to mention that our output has increased in the same period of time. They're also never going to mention that those manufacturing jobs currently are below the average wage in America, and that service industry jobs are generally people are happier in and they're better paid in. And that's why people have moved out of manufacturing. It's not just that we're outsourcing these jobs to China or Cambodia or wherever. It's that those people are leaving those manufacturing jobs to go into service industry jobs. I've brought this up before. Only in a rich country Can you have a thing like an escape room and have multiple of those in a major city, right? Where they're competing with each other for a place that I go spend $40 to spend an hour trying to get out of a room. That is something that only happens in rich countries. And that's the other thing politicians don't love to mention to you when they're campaigning. They want you to think everything's broken all the time. They never mention the fact that part of the reason, the percentage, so there's two ways that you can look at the manufacturing jobs. You can look at the total number of jobs like we just did, where it went from 17 million to 12 million. If you look at it as a percentage of the entire workforce, it looks even smaller. It looks like it shrunk even more, just because people are moving out of that industry into other industries that did not even exist 30 years because of maybe technology. There's all sorts of reasons that sectors change in the United States economy or any economy. No one talks about that. No one likes to say, hey, it's good that as a country we're getting richer and therefore we're spending more money on services. That's something that naturally happens in every wealthy economy. You start moving from people spending money on goods and they move to spending more of their disposable income on services. And it should be noted that part of the way that we can do that is spend more money on those services is because we are getting those goods for cheaper from other countries when we are not efficient at creating those things. So you're a little like, this is a little fidget cube. I cannot imagine a situation where this would be better manufactured in the United States and costing a lot more money. This is the kind of thing that I am happy to import, because I don't necessarily think that the job of putting this together is a great American job. It could even be the same for high technology stuff like iPhones. Okay. We don't have the capacity to do that here. It'd be great if we did, but it would also greatly increase the cost of this good. And I might have less money to spend going out to eat and supporting a local restaurant, or less money to go get a massage or a haircut or whatever. So we think way too simply about this, and that's because politicians have to get our attention with really short things. We have very short attention spans, and it helps them to point out the bad and not the good. So it's just worth thinking about that for a second. That's probably why there's such a big gap between our understanding of the loss of jobs and not understanding that we're actually making more stuff in America than we ever have. Most people are shocked about that stat when I tell them. So, will Donald Trump's tariffs make a difference in manufacturing? Because I believe that he really wants to bring back manufacturing in the United States. I think most of these politicians do. It's great when they get to cut a ribbon on a manufacturing place. They just love doing that more than anything on earth for some reason. So my question is, will these protectionist tariffs actually create more jobs in America? And I thought it would be worth taking a look at this jacket I'm wearing specifically because I bought it a couple weeks ago. It's a Levi's jacket, which is, of course, great American company, but guess what? They don't make this in America. They make it in Cambodia. And we make a lot of clothing in Cambodia, Vietnam, Indonesia, places like that. So let's look at just the cost and see if this would work out. So here's a little bit of, I used to work in retail, so I know a little bit about this. This jacket has a retail price of $90. That generally means, I'm just taking averages here, don't know the exact numbers, but generally that means that the retailer you buy this from, let's just say you buy this at the mall from whatever store, and Levi's sold it to them for normally half of what they're selling it for. So the wholesale cost of this would maybe be $45, and the cost to manufacture it, most clothing companies want to make a 50% margin on things. So they're actually making it for $30, selling it to the retailer for $45, and then that retailer sells it to you for $90. That's how everyone makes money in this situation. We're going to use those numbers, even though they're not anything I can point to in a data sheet. It's just like general averages, okay? So if we take this jacket and it costs $30 to manufacture and they're making that in Cambodia, and Donald Trump wants to put a 49%, although he just paused that at the time of this recording, it's just going to be 10% for the time being, but it could go up to 49%. And this is all just based on our trade deficit with them, apparently. So the point is, in Cambodia, those average wages are like, basically it works out to $1 an hour. If you take their minimum wages, monthly wages, you extrapolate out of that, let's say they're working 40 hours a week, although they're probably working more than 40 hours a week. So they probably actually get paid less than $1 an hour, but we're just going to say it's $1 an hour, okay? Cambodians get paid $1 an hour. That's their minimum wage. Our minimum wage is $7.25. So if Levi's wanted to onshore manufacturing this jacket, they are going to pay, let's say, so if 20% of the cost is labor, that's the just average on textiles. If 20%, that's $6. So it costs $6 on the labor to put this jacket together in Cambodia. immediately that becomes $43, $43.50 technically, if you just pay someone minimum wage in America and we say it takes the same amount of time. So just the labor cost goes up. And if we assume the materials and everything else stays the same, then this jacket's cost to Levi's goes from $30 to $67. So now if they want to make that 50% profit, they've got to sell it to the wholesaler like at $90 or so. And then if they want to make the same profit margin they did, they got to probably get up to, $180, $190, $200. So the jacket goes from being $90 to somewhere between $180 and $200. Let's just put the low end. We'll just say it's $180 and it doubles in price for you, the consumer that goes to the store. That 49% tariff that is maybe going to go into Cambodia. Levi's could pay that on the import, and it would only be $135 at retail for the consumer once you work everything back. So do you think Levi's is going to take a jacket that is manufactured in America and it's going to cost consumers $200? Or do you think they're going to just pay the import tax, sell it for $135 instead? I think almost every company is going to take the second option and continue to import stuff, meaning they're not manufacturing it in the United States, meaning it's not creating jobs. If that is the case, and I know every company is not going to work the exact same way, and I'm using a clothing item instead of an iPhone because it's a lot less complicated. Obviously, you can see how you could spin up a clothing manufacturing place in the United States a lot faster than an iPhone manufacturing facility, right? So if that happens, the tariffs will have done nothing to increase manufacturing in the United States. Now, I'm not saying no one will start building stuff. In his first term, I've mentioned this before, the washing machine tariffs, Samsung and LG did create something like 1,800 jobs for manufacturing their stuff in the United States instead of outside and importing it to avoid that import tax. But the prices still rose enough on all washers and dryers that we ended up paying as consumers $800,000 per every one of those 1,800 jobs. And I don't feel like that's worth it. I don't feel like as consumers that's worth it for us. Because keep in mind, that was just tariffs on washing machines. If we do 10% tariffs, which is the case right now, although it's all over the board and it might change by tomorrow by the time this is released, if we only do 10% tariffs across the board, that's still going to be devastating as far as prices going up. It's probably not enough to get those companies to change their manufacturing cycles to be here in America instead of outside the United States. So all it will do, if that's the case, is raise prices for U.S. consumers and put less of a gap between what they have to spend on consumer goods and what they make. Because if their wages don't go up at the same time, that's essentially a pay cut. And what we do too often is we think of wages as something that when it increases, it's good, and when it decreases, it's bad. But very often, politicians especially won't talk about if your prices of your consumer goods go up. That's essentially like getting a pay cut, because the gap between what you make and what you have to spend on the stuff you need, if that gap closes, you have less money to spend on other things. You have to start making choices of, well, do I buy that jacket at all? Because it went from 90 to 135. Maybe I'm willing to spend 90, but not 135. If a car goes up by, the estimates are $5,000 to $13,000 per vehicle, that these tariffs would make the prices of American manufactured cars go up, people are just going to drive their old car a little bit longer and they're not going to buy a new car. That's going to make the used car market go up. So there's all sorts of things that happen here, and almost none of them are there's more manufacturing jobs in the United States. And remember, please, that I did this math on minimum wage of $7.25 in America, which almost no one agrees. I mean, everyone agrees. That's not really a good living wage, right? Now, we can have a whole different discussion about minimum wage policy, but the point is, let's say that's more of like a normal, what we consider minimum wage in a lot of places, like $15 an hour. I mean, I think you can get $15 an hour working at Chick-fil-A. So let's say it's $15 an hour to make these jackets. Obviously, you can see how the price is going to way increase, and no one's going to do that. So I frankly do not think that if Donald Trump's end goal is more manufacturing in America, I don't think he's going to get that with these tariffs. So what could he actually do that would make that actually happen? I think what you'd have to do is some deregulation, which of course he is for, but sometimes more in words than actual practice. We've got all sorts of permitting and like regulations and environmental regulations and work requirements and minimum wages and overtime rules. And we've got all sorts of laws and regulations that go into preventing a manufacturing from job here being as good of a deal for a company as it is for them to outsource it to somewhere else. at some point we have to weigh which one's more important. Is it more important for us to have those manufacturing jobs in America, or is it more important that we, save whatever environmental kind of thing we're looking at? And I'm not trying to poo-poo on the environmental stuff. I'm just saying that you do have to make that decision at some point, because those are the things that hinder these from happening. The CHIPS Act that Joe Biden signed and Congress passed under his administration, the goal of it is to get more chip manufacturing happening in the United States, which I think is a good goal, because I am sympathetic to the arguments that we do need to be we need to be able to manufacture the stuff that specifically ties to national security. And I do think chips are one of those things. But what happened in the process of that is it wasn't just about the national emergency of we need to make these here. They wanted all sorts of red tape to be there for, it's got to be union jobs, and you've got to have a daycare, and it's got to have these diversity requirements. And they put all the progressive wish list in the thing instead of saying, okay, do we need these jobs, or do we want them to check off a bunch of boxes for progressives? And Republicans do the same thing, by the way. They want their little list of things so that they can brag about them as politicians. We've got to decide what's more important. If something is a national security kind of thing and we do want to onshore that and we want to protect that a little bit, I think that's worth doing potentially. But at that point, maybe we have to deregulate a little bit and cut some red tape to get that done. A good example I mentioned in California, so far only 4 houses have been permitted to be rebuilt since the fires. That's too slow. And that's in the case of a natural disaster. But you don't think there's permitting processes for spinning up a manufacturing plant in this country. You've got another thing coming. Okay. So that's what we got to do. I think if Trump was really serious about this, that's what he would be talking about. I don't think we need to bring back something that's still here. I think that politicians are lying to you about we're not making anything in this country anymore. The data does not back that up. So we don't need to bring it back. It's already here. We need to build for what's next, not be nostalgic about what's already gone. We need to make smart choices, not based on some sort of rose-colored glasses that we have on that thinks the past is better. Look, the entire Trump thing is about make America great again. And I don't love the progressive poo-pooing on that of asking, when was America great? Because to me, that's implying that they think America's never been great. And they're also implying that anyone that supports MAGA is a racist by saying that, because they're like, what is it, the 1850s when we still had slavery? And I'm kind of frankly tired of those kind of stupid arguments. But it is worth Donald Trump tapped into something. We are nostalgic as people. And one thing we're nostalgic for, because we have the wrong information in our head, is that we think that we want those manufacturing jobs. But that's because most people don't understand they pay less. Most people don't understand that people don't want to go into manufacturing. Most people are not dreaming of their kid going into a manufacturing job because they're lower paying, they're harder work, they're more physical labor, and they'd rather their kid be in a service industry. They're better pay. They're less work. Those people are happier when they're in those kind of industries. So I think that we've got to have a better understanding of this, and we've got to take off the rose-colored glasses and pretend that everything was hunky-dory in the 70s when we were employing a higher percentage of our population in manufacturing jobs. So I obviously don't think this is going to work, but you might think differently. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. You can also subscribe if you like principled political content without all the outrage and fear-mongering that normally comes along with it. I would love to have you around. That's it for me. See you next time.